When you meet a founder, in any setting, could be a pitch, could be any conversation, what are you looking for?
Yeah, so the big thing we're looking for is, I'll use a term. The term is the idea maze. So this is a term from our partner, Balaji Srinivasan. So I give him credit for this. He articulated and described this conceptually in the way that we use it now. He said sort of put into a real definition, kind of what we were all kind of grasping for and trying to understand. So it's the term he uses. He calls the idea maze. So what is the idea maze? The idea maze is the process of going from having an idea, I want to build a product that does X. And then basically it's the 5 or 10 years of thinking and processing and scenario planning and doing, user research and kind of thinking your way through the twists and turns of every aspect of sort of how that will play out over time. The idea maze is like, okay, what if we, use lots of examples, but like, what if we brought the iPhone to market? What would people use it for? Okay, then how would people build apps? How would those apps, happen? What apps would make sense? What old desktop apps would make sense to transfer over? Which ones wouldn't? What new apps would emerge? What APIs do we have to provide? What's the relationship we have to have with the carrier? How much bandwidth do we need to have? What are the price points, right? So it's the 1,000 questions that follow just having the product idea. And the idea maze basically is the process of working your way through those 1,000 questions, all the different twists and turns of how this is going to unfold in the market. And the reason this is important is because what you find is the great entrepreneurs are really good at going through the idea maze. The great entrepreneurs are really good at navigating through like those 1,000 questions. They're really good at like really understanding in detail all the twists and turns that their idea is going to take. They're really good at anticipating all the problems that they're going to have in the market, all the sort of key bottlenecks, the things they're going to have to unlock, how they're going to convince people things are a good idea, what they're going to charge. They're really good at working through all those ideas, and they work through that kind of like it's a maze. And look, they're not right all the time. Like it's like a maze. They hit points where they can't get any further, and then they have to backtrack, right? And they have to reconfigure their product and idea, and they have to adapt, right? And so that's why the maze metaphor is the right one. But then they do work their way all through, and then they have a good chance to get out the other side of the maze and have a big success. The great founders, basically, the really, really good founders have worked their way through the maze even before they start the company, right? So what you find is they have often spent 5 or 10 years prior to the time they meet with us, and they have actually navigated their way all the way through the maze. And maybe that's because they worked at a previous company that tried and failed at something, and now they think they understand why it tried and failed, and now they know how to do it right. Maybe it's because it was their hobby for a long time and now they've decided to make it their profession. Maybe it's something that they've actually been prototyping in their spare time. Maybe they already have the product working at the time they come in to see us, which is, what's the best illustration you've made your way through the idea maze? The product is already working by the time you come see us. Like that by the time the Google guys raised money, the Google search engine was up and running. They had already proven their way through the maze. Right. And so anyway, the best founders, they've gone through that process. They've put the burden on themselves to think through all the twists and turns. And then what happens is, in the meeting, basically what happens is we can ask increasingly detailed questions about all of the specifics of what they're thinking about, and they will have increasingly detailed answers, right? Whereas the founders that haven't been through the idea maze, they fuzz out, right? They haven't thought it through, and they fuzz out. And basically, this is sort of the cheat code. Like the ones that have been through the idea maze already, like they've got a really good shot. The ones that are at the very beginning, the archetype of I have a brand new idea, I have a clean sheet of paper, I got to raise money against it, and I'm going to start the idea maze on day one. Of course, what it means is we're going to pay for the trip through the idea maze, right? And like they may or may not make it through by the time they run out of money. And so those are just much more dangerous. We give an example. So our partner, Martin Casado. So one of our first wins as a venture firm was he's now our partner, but Martin Casado has started a company called Nicira that we back, that VMware bought, and it's now a really big and important product in networking, software-defined networking. He pitched this idea at us. We're like, wow, that sounds intriguing. We went and talked to all the experts we knew in the networking industry, and they basically all told us it's a stupid idea, it'll never work. And so we went back to Martin and we said, well, all the experts say it's a stupid idea and it'll never work. And he said, well, that's because he basically said that's why they haven't gone through the idea maze. Like they don't actually understand what I'm doing. And we said, well, how do you know? Why are you so confident? He said, well, I've spent the last 5 years of my life doing this at Stanford, right? And that took the form of inventing the concept of software-defined networking. It took the form of actually defining a protocol called OpenFlow, and then it actually took the form of an implementation that was actually already running. And so he had spent 5 years actually proving out the entire thesis for Nicira before we even met him. And we're like, oh, that sounds great. And then of course, then we said the next thing, which was like, whoa, that's great. You're going to take the software you built at Stanford, you're going to put it in a box, and that's what you're going to sell, right? And he's like, oh no, I'm going to throw that all away. Like that software is shit. Like I don't want that software. But he's like, now I know how to do it right. Right. So by the time Nicira came to market, he had not only been through the idea maze the first time at Stanford, he actually shipped version 2. right? And so by the time the existing networking companies figured out what was going on, it was too late. And the Nicira software is now the industry standard software for this. But that was the cheat code, right? He had already actually done all this before he raised money. This goes to, by the way, to my favorite startup advice of all time, which everybody always, founders I think always, some founders love, a lot of founders hate. Like the best startup advice of all time is Steve Martin's advice to aspiring comedians in his book Born Standing Up. And Steve Martin's advice to aspiring comedians is it's a one-line piece of advice. He says, "Be so good they can't ignore you."
A key criteria for any 25-year-old or 35-year-old. I would say the following. Most people operate most of the time based on expectations of them by others. So they will look at what others expect. You expect to retire at a certain age. You expect to have a VP title. You expect to have a better car or a bigger house, as opposed to saying, what is my motivation? So I call it internal motivation as opposed to external motivation based on expectations from society. You'll be a lot happier and a lot freer if you are internally driven, and I've always been internally driven.
I think that is so profound. I mean, I just turned 40, and and I've realized the people who are happy are the ones where the internal engine is motivating them, as opposed to the people you see on Twitter or your peers, because that is a path to unhappiness. That is so profound.
Think more. There's a tremendous tendency in modern times and with sort of sophisticated education and so on to just get into this, I know how to do this, I have this skill, I can keep doing this thing. And, for example, in science, one of the things that's really notable is the people who end up making the greatest contributions end up being people who have good strategy about what questions to ask. Turns out it's easier to answer the questions than it is to figure out which questions to ask. Or for most people, that's the case. Try and figure out things for yourself. Don't just say, oh, the experts have figured this out. We're done here. I myself take the point of view that, yes, you may be an expert. That's great. I can learn something from you. But if you can't explain to me why this is true, I'm just not going to believe it. It's kind of like, I can understand anything if it's explained to me in reasonable enough ways. And I think people tend to just sort of give up. They say, I know this particular thing. I don't know this other stuff. I don't keep the thinking apparatus engaged when I'm dealing with these other things. People, in terms of what they learn, how broadly they learn things, how broadly they kind of think about things. I would say that I tend to think, when I see things happening in the world, I'm like, that was really dumb. That was, how did people do that? And then you realize, you kind of unpack it and you realize, well, this person was walking in this particular direction, and that's the only direction they knew how to walk in. That was the only thing they were thinking about. The fact that there was a giant, freight train barreling down on them from the side, they just didn't notice that. And, I think that if it's the make the world a better place, I would say that more thinking and more people kind of having confidence that they can actually understand things and getting to the point where they really, really do understand things. I think that would be from my point of view, I would love to see more thinking going on in the world. I think that would be a good thing.
People who actually are still kids, I guess a few things. One, don't trust your friends and your family when they tell you, what you're passionate. When they say, "Oh, you're so good at X or Y or Z, you should follow your passion," because parents, in particular, statistically, hugely overestimate the abilities of their offspring. You need to go and find people who are not tied to you. So if you find mentors, find whether it's professors or or hobbyists, find someone who can objectively grade you on what your strengths and weaknesses are, because you don't want to waste time pursuing something that you like doing that you are not necessarily really cut out for, especially if you think you're better at it than you are. That's a very dangerous path. And maybe it means you decide to get better at it first. But I see a lot of founders who think that they're better at something than they are. And you see that when they're talking about the strength of their startups, like, yeah, I'm really good at X, Y, or Z. And then you look at their design, you're like, I don't think so, man. And, it's important to know that. I guess the second bit of advice would be, be careful who you trust. But in general, the job of an executive is to make yourself obsolete. If you are the best person in the company at doing something, you've probably been negligent in your hiring process. And this doesn't apply in the very early days. In the very early days, everyone wears hats. Like, don't feel like you can't do anything when you're 10 people. But once you get to the point where you're 50 people or 60 people, I see a lot of people holding on to the things they like doing because they like doing it and they think that they are just God's gift to the earth at whatever that thing is. And how do I know that? Because that was me. I mean, there was a time where I really wanted to hold on to the hardware design and the electrical design and the optical design. It took me a lot of working through my personal issues to realize that I was not the best optical engineer in the world. I was not the best mechanical engineer, not even close. And I needed to hire people to do all of that for me because I could do those things to some degree, but it would just be me playing house to the detriment of my customers and my investors and my employees. And so that leads to my final bit of advice, which is when kids ask me, they come and say, Palmer, I love programming. I want to start a technology company. What advice do you have for me? My advice is that if you really love technology and you really love programming, do not start a technology company. If you want to work on nonstop bullshit, you should definitely start a technology company because that's really your job at the end of the day. It's not to work on the tech that you love and to program the computer because that's what you like doing. Like, you're the final backstop for HR issues, fundraising issues, legal issues, interpersonal employee issues, broad strategic issues, working with government regulators. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I do, and my life's great. I can't complain, but there's a lot of stuff I do. It's not what I want to be doing, but it's what I have to be doing. I wish I could throw it all away and go and sit at a computer and just do the fun design stuff that I like and the fun engineering stuff that I like. But alas, and I think it's important for people to understand because I'll leave it with this: there is a fetishization of being the founder, the person who runs the company, that I think it's healthy in some ways. It gets people to not go work at a big tech megacorp and instead do something different. It gets people to really try to reach their maximum potential. But I think that the issue with that fetishization is that it downplays the importance of maybe not the founder, but the chief technical officer of the company, one of the lead hardware engineers of the company, the guy who's the chief architect for the software. Those are extraordinarily important roles. And I feel like there's a lot of smart people out there who could be absolutely killing it, working on tech every day, digging into the tech, and they would be happy and healthy and well paid. And instead, they're trying to force themselves into that founder hole and they're a round peg, and so they're unhappy and they feel like they didn't get what they were promised. And I encourage people, if you are struggling in particular, consider that you don't necessarily need to be the CEO or the founder. You can do a lot of cool things in the tech industry without doing that.
Work like hell, like work so hard. These are the best years of your life. Just give it everything, If I wish I went back and like change something, I would have just worked even harder. I worked hard, but could have worked even harder. Yeah, and the reason I say this is because those were the days when I could pull 3 all-nighters in a week, no problem. Like body adjusts. I can eat whatever I want. I can eat at 3 a.m. in the night and no stomach upsets, nothing. Even mentally, the amount of concentration power you have for a significant unblocked period of time is going to get lower. So I would advise you all to work harder, seek more opportunities, cold email people. It's fine. All these things matter. Like the way you message, what is the win for the person who's reading it to help you? Like, you should think through all these things, but try your best. Keep giving yourself more shots. Life is about luck surface area, right? You're not going to, there are always people I know. I've had these friends even in undergrad, and if I meet them now, they're pretty much the same. They talk the exact same way, where they're all like, "Oh, that guy got lucky." And that's fundamental. So change your attitude. It's easier to change your attitude when you're younger than older. It's hard because attitude change requires you to rewire your neural circuit a lot. Whereas learning new things that you already don't know is much easier in terms of gradient updates. So get to the right attitude, that don't blame it on luck. Just give yourself more shots at success. And everybody gets lucky chances in their life. It's more about making sure you have enough surface area. Try, and that can only happen if you're opportunistic and work super hard.
Love it. I love it.
I think the only thing I would add to that,
this on the attitude changes, I think it's going to be very important for you to surround yourself with the right people. And somebody watching this will be like, well, I'm sitting in this hostel room, or dorm room, wherever.
Yeah.
How do I do that? And I think that's why the power of this stuff, online communities, etc. Right?
Exactly.
I'm sure you're like one DM, one Discord server away from any one of us or anybody here that really matters. And I think people are like, I don't know what's wrong with my attitude. It's very hard to understand that until you are in a WhatsApp group or a DM group or hanging out with 20 other people. Then you like, oh, I see what that means. Then you can take it. So, and I think that's one of the...
I agree. I think, Aravind, you had also like said that in one of the talks I'd seen where you'd said something like one of the things Sriram and I talk about a lot is it is very hard to point to a culture or take somebody who's never like worked in a high performance, high productivity culture and point to something like that and say, that is how things are done, and get them to understand it. You fundamentally have to be immersed in it and work with people like better than yourself, smarter than yourself, works harder than yourself for you to like understand it. And one of the things that brought a smile to my face is when you talked about how, when you went to IIT Madras, it's like a pinnacle, like, anybody in India like knows IITs are like the gold standard of universities. Then you went to Berkeley, and for what you're studying again, like gold standard. And you thought, oh yeah, like I'm like really smart, I've made it. And then you joined OpenAI and you're like, actually, I'm not that smart. Like there are these people who are like much smarter than me, and they're just like better. And I think it is really important to constantly surround yourself with people who are just going to challenge you and push you, because otherwise you just never know what you can be capable of.
Yeah, 100%. I also think it's very, very important. Like attitude wise, like intellectual honesty is the best like thing you can adopt. And like pretty much all the great leaders in the world have that, at least up to a certain point where they were like really growing rapidly during that time phase. When you're not the best at something, it's always good to like figure out like what you can be the best at, rather than thinking, oh, the guy better than you is just more lucky, or like he got it because he had a head start over you, and trying to blame the world, and like trying to see what you can improve on your end.